Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tonellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I have made it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. This episode is brought to you by HarperCollins Australia.
Hello listeners, I'm Cassie Hamer. I'm a Sydney-based author and your guest host for this episode with debut Brisbane author Lillian Telford, discussing her novel Lovesick, a lyrical, beautifully written story of Gordon and Gabby, the 20-something-year-olds who fall desperately in love and then desperately out of it. If you're a fan of work by Sally Rooney or Diana Reid, this one is definitely for you. Lillian, welcome to Talking Aussie Books and congratulations on Lovesick. I just loved the incredible prose and the emotional depth and layers of the main characters. And I especially love the dedication at the very start of the book, which reads, "To the 12-year-old me who stood up in front of her class and gave a presentation on how she would one day be a published author." I really did love that. What would that 12-year-old think of what you've achieved with this book?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that intro. That was lovely. You know, I kind of think she would sort of be like, well, obviously, of course, we're here. I didn't think it would go any other way, is probably what she would think.
So it sounds like it was always in the stars that you knew from a really young age that this was what you were going to do. What kind of books and writing was the 12-year-old you fascinated by?
Oh, fantasy. Yeah, funnily enough, because it's quite there's quite a degree of separation now. But definitely, I think fantasy, I was into like things with dragons and big epic love tales and all of that sort of stuff. So there's definitely none of that in the current realm.
That's so interesting because, as you would well know, romantasy, the romance fantasy genre, is absolutely huge right now. So it's really interesting that you've chosen to go a much more contemporary, realist, literary route. So let's talk a little bit more about what you've written, this beautiful work where our main characters, as I said, are Gordon and Gabby. They meet on a drug-fueled night in Brisbane, and as I mentioned, they fall madly in love. But it's very complicated. They both have baggage, including parental abandonment and neglect. And it's that baggage plus other trauma that drives them apart. So I'm wondering what drew you to telling this particular story?
Well, I have been working on Lovesick for a very long time. I know a lot of authors, their debut has been with them for like a decade, which is the case for me. I started writing it when I was about 18 or 19, and I was in a university lecture. I was paying close attention, obviously. But, you know, I wasn't setting out to write. I didn't think I'm going to write a novel to get published. I was just writing all the time back then and just writing all sorts of stories and all sorts of characters. And I had these two people and they didn't even have names yet. They were just desperately in love with each other and it just wasn't working for whatever reason. So I just started writing it to sort of figure out why. I think because it reflected a lot of what I was going through at the time, being that age where, you know, you're turning into this adult person and you're meeting all of these new people and forming all of these connections and kind of learning who you are and what you want from other people.
It's fair to say that that particular age of life, when you're in your 20s, is a particular source of fascination and interest for both readers and writers. I have some theories about why, and I think you've sort of alluded to some of them in that answer that you just gave, but I am interested in why you think we want particularly to read about this stage of life. To me, it's that hinge point, I suppose, where you're definitely not a child, but you're not necessarily equipped to deal with some of the responsibilities of adult life, or I suppose there's just so many unanswered questions about your life when you're at that stage. What do you think?
I keep saying to people that it was like a second adolescence. Like you're coming into, you almost think that you know who you are, but there's still so much left to learn. And I think for myself, I was starting to have all of these questions about like what were my parents had always been like the grown-ups. And I was starting to realize that I felt like I was playing pretend at being an adult. And I was wondering, you know, what was it like for my mom and dad when they were this age? And did they ever go through this? What was girlhood like for my mom, like before she was a wife and a mother and like out in the career and all that sort of thing? And I came to realize that there was still so much evolving left to do, and how much of that evolution, the catalyst for that evolution is other people as well. Yeah.
Mm. And so are those the sorts of conversations that you are able to have with your mum, or was it more that writing was a way of processing some of those feelings, or a mixture of both?
I think more so writing was a way of processing that, not in the sense that I couldn't talk to my parents about it at all, but it's just something that I always come back to. Like in my writing, I always come back to, there's always elements of the parent-child relationship and motherhood especially. I've like always sort of delved into that sort of area, and like pregnancy, and I've written about pregnancy loss like quite a bit in my life. So it is something that I think I've just sort of tried to work out and work through all of these really big, complex feelings that sort of just seem to sit within you. Yeah, I always turn to the page.
And so pregnancy loss is quite a key theme of the book. And as you have just said, you know, some of that comes from having written about it, perhaps gone through it yourself. And you're now in this really interesting position where you're a new mum, you've got a 6-month-old baby, you've just put out this book into the world, which does deal a lot with fertility, pregnancy, miscarriage. Where do you find your emotional state on all of that now? Having had a baby, are your feelings about miscarriage and loss different? Do you still feel that grief as viscerally as we sort of feel it on the page?
I remember I was going through the edits when I was very early on in my pregnancy and thinking like, oh my God, I hope that this isn't like some kind of foreshadowing for like what's to come. And I found it really difficult to sort of go back to that, to go back to those feelings while also, you know, being pregnant and having all of these fears and doubts. And like I said, I was very early on. So it was really, really tough to sort of peel back those layers again. But I think that even just experiencing pregnancy and like carrying a baby, it's unreal. It's like the connection is that deep connection that I can only speak from my personal experience, but the deep connection that I felt to my baby and just feeling him like kick or flutter or move around, like it is very healing. I remember the day, I remember exactly where I was. I was standing in my kitchen and I think I was maybe 17 weeks pregnant. And I just felt this like little bit of fluttering. And I had this deep feeling of, oh, I love you. I love you already. And there's nothing like that, no other feeling like that in the world. So to reflect on what happens in the book is almost a different kind of sadness to think about what has already happened and then to move forward with that.
In a way, the book, I suppose, in years and decades to come, will be almost like a diary of sorts, maybe, for some of the feelings that you experience. But miscarriage is a special kind of grief, I suppose, and I've been through it myself as well, because it's the grief for lost potential. It's something that's very
Yes.
real to you, but it's not real to other people. And the trickiest bit is that the only solution to getting through it is to have a baby. And that can feel impossible when you've lost one. I suppose the thing that you most want is the thing that you have lost. And in a way, you know, I hear what you're saying, that trying to edit a book about miscarriage when you're in the early stages of pregnancy is difficult. And I was very moved by what you said about the depth of love that you have for this unborn child when you feel it flutter. But that depth of connection, I suppose, explains also the depth of loss. that you feel when you lose a baby, that the two feelings are equally matched. And in the book, it's definitely a factor in the breakdown of the relationship between Gabby and Gordon, but it's sort of almost an abstract. There's so many different things going on between the two of them. I think it's fair to say that there's really no one thing that drives them apart.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I read a review about Lovesick on Instagram where someone said there's no villain, there's no person who does something like terribly wrong. It's this moment of like realizing that, yes, this is really terrible what's happened, but actually there's a lot of stuff that's not working. And this just sort of helps them both to see that there's so much that it is making it really impossible for them to be together. And how could they possibly move forward with intention of even thinking, okay, well, maybe we will have a baby, like maybe we'll do this again, when they know that there is so much healing in all these other factors of their lives that they each have to deal with first.
And so much of it, as you said, you have a fascination with parent-child relationships, and that really is the other big theme in this book, in that Gordon really hasn't completely processed the fact that his mother abandoned him and his brother and sister when they were very young. And Gabby too has sense of almost disconnection from her parents, who are high-flying barristers who are present physically but not perhaps always present emotionally for her. But one of the things I really appreciated about Lovesick was the structure of it, which is so interesting. We flip between both characters' points of view, but at two different points in time. From Gordon, we get a third-person point of view on the relationship as it unfolds. But from Gabby, we hear about the aftermath of the breakup, and her chapters are written in present tense first person. Why did you want to tell the story in this way? And was that always the structure that you set out with?
No, it was not always the structure. It was just Gabby's POV, but then I sort of got to this point where I felt like it was really missing something, and I needed to know, like what Gordon was thinking, and I needed to be in his head a bit more to fully understand why this wasn't working. Like I said earlier, I just had these people and this like conflict, but I had to sort of write through it to figure it out. So I then introduced Gordon's POV, which helped balance things out. But some feedback that I got was that it was a little bit uninteresting to have two people narrate the same events. And I guess then I had to think, we know what it's like, the aftermath, but why is it such a big deal for Gabby that this relationship has broken down? So I thought I would take it back to the beginning with Gordon to show more like how they were in love and how they did view each other, and especially how he viewed her, to understand how it could get to the point where it could no longer work.
It's a really satisfying way to tell the story, because we do get that before and after. But aside from that breakup between Gordon and Gabby, there's also a breakup of sorts between Gabby and her best mate, Rasheen. The friendship can't really withstand the two of them being in intense external relationships. But Rasheen and Gabby are such a life force for each other, and there's true grief here where when the friendship breaks down. It's such an intimate and passionate friendship. Gabby describes the two of them as opposite sides of a two-way mirror. I'm wondering, what did you want to say about the nature of friendship here?
I've had friendships like this. Rasheen is definitely an amalgamation of experiences and people that I've known. It's devastating to lose a friend. I think it obviously sucks when a romantic relationship doesn't work out, but there's something about friendship that when you go into it feels a lot more permanent from the beginning, especially a close bond where you've known someone for a little while and it feels like you've experienced. They met each other working in a restaurant, and if anyone who's listening has worked in hospitality, it can be the pits and meeting someone and forming that kind of bond through this intensity, and you get really close really quickly, and it's almost this codependency. Having that breakdown is, I think, even harder than, it's one of the hardest relationships, I think, to decide it doesn't work anymore. And I really wanted readers to be able to kind of connect with that feeling of having to let someone really important go, but to have it be markedly different from a romantic relationship, because they do carry different weight and the expectations are completely different, especially because Gabby and Roisin were connected before Roisin had Liana and Gabby had even met Gordon. So it needed to feel like this almost betrayal that they especially it couldn't keep their friendship.
So do you think that there is space in a romantic relationship to have the kind of intensity of friendship that Roisin and Gabby have? Is it possible just to have two such passionate relationships going side by side, or is it inevitable that one of them has to break?
I'm leaning towards saying it would be inevitable, because I think it became very difficult for Gabby and also for Roisin to prioritize their romantic partners in the order that your significant other should be. But it's very difficult if you have this relationship that has been the center of that is your entire universe. How do you then say you can't be so high on my list anymore without that causing almost irreparable damage or this breakdown of trust? So I do think that it would be very difficult to manage that kind of thing. And as I said, they're quite codependent and it's kind of us against the world. And I think the moment where they realize it's not us against the world, it's kind of like, well, what's the point of us then if we're not going to battle?
They really see each other. You have this sense that they are intense soulmates, and as Gabby said, sort of two sides of the same coin, I suppose. But I want to talk now a little bit about how Lovesick came to be published. You mentioned there that it's something you started working on when you were in your late teens. As we know, you'd always had the ambition since you were very young to be a writer. You then had a couple of short stories published in literary journals, and I understand you've had two manuscripts shortlisted for the Queensland Literary Awards, and one of them was Lovesick. You won a couple of mentorships for the book. So I'm wondering, how did it sort of go from that stage to ultimately finding a home with HQ Fiction?
Yeah. So I was awarded a copyright agency mentorship with the Australian Society of Authors, and I was mentored by Lee Kaufman, which was just invaluable. Lovesick would not be where it is today without that mentorship. Like the emotional depth that Lee was able to get me to see, to bring to the manuscript, was just, it would not be where it is today without that. But I did get to the point after that where I sort of thought, I've been working on this for a really long time and I am starting to get to the point where I'd love to put my energy into something new. And I had to kind of decide, do I want to keep going with this? Like, I had been shortlisted for another mentorship for it, and I just sort of thought, I feel like I'm so close. I just had this feeling of just being really, really close, but also a lot of doubt and kind of wondering if I could really do it, if this was the book to do it. And also I'm trying to have a wedding and save money, and like it's so hard to write a book and also live your day life, your day job and all that sort of thing. So I thought, I'd been shortlisted in the Glendower Award at the Queensland Literary Awards before, and I sort of thought, I'm just going to take a chance and think, if I could at least be shortlisted, that'll be the sign. That'll be the sign for me that this is worth it. And like, incredibly, I was shortlisted, which I couldn't really believe, because I really thought that this manuscript had just was done. And I didn't win the award, but like having the sort of air of the Queensland Literary Awards and almost the social capital that I was able to get from that, I was kind of able to elevate my expression of interest letter to send to agents. And I was able to sign with Sarah Mackenzie, and she just showed such great enthusiasm from like the very beginning. I was really excited because she was really excited. We just clicked. It had really great chemistry, and she kind of shared my vision for the book. That was something I was really worried about, that it wouldn't find the right representation. But she was amazing. She was so excited. And she even said, we were sort of back and forth, and I didn't really know how to say, okay, yes, I'd like to sign with you. So I sort of said something like, oh, like, you know, if you were keen, what would be the process? And she replied and said something like, oh, sorry if I haven't been clear, but I would love to represent this project. That was amazing. And we went ahead and I signed with Sarah, and she pretty much started pitching it almost immediately. There was some interest from a range of publishers, but from the first meeting I had with Joanna from HQ, it was the same spark of chemistry that I had with Sarah. She was just so excited. Like, that got me again. I was like, oh, okay, this feels right. And I didn't hesitate too much. I just had this gut feeling that like I wanted a publishing house that was not only like, yeah, we'd love to sign you, but also like would want to push this book and want to see it fly high, basically. So yeah, that's how we found our home.
Did the book have to go through much further revision after that? Because I imagine after so many years of working on it, you were probably sick to death of it.
A little bit, yeah. It didn't go through too much revision. We had one structural edit and then one copy edit, and then just like the final proofing, which I was very relieved about because, like you say, I was kind of done. I sort of had approached the editing thinking, I don't know what else can even be done to this novel. But my editors were lovely and very gracious. And one of my favorite comments that I just always had a laugh when I would see a comment that started with, "This is interesting," because I know it's going to be like a, "Are you sure about this?"
Usually it's the acronym NQR, not quite right, but maybe they were being a little more gentle with you. Yours were probably more right than the feedback that I get. Something else that I think was a great choice for this book was to set it in Brisbane, which makes sense because you're from there, from what I assume. Specifically, you set it in the West End. The heat, the rain, the floods, the grit, all of it provides an evocative backdrop to the inner turmoil of the story. Was Brisbane always going to be the setting for this?
No, and I was actually living on,
Okay.
living on the Gold Coast when I started writing it. But like I said at the beginning, like I was just writing for the sake of writing. And I kind of got to this point where I was like, where is this? I live in Brisbane now, but I loved the city. I loved the city so much. And I just thought that's where it is. And I've always loved going to like West End, and I've even been a bit of a Bali rat. And I just was reading a lot of Australian fiction that was taking place in Melbourne and Sydney, and there is representation of Brisbane, but I would say that there's not nearly enough. There's so much to the city that's just a gold mine. You know, there's not just West End, but there's also New Farm, and there are the depths of like Fortitude Valley, and there's just so much that you can do with all of this that I just don't see explored very much. And I thought, I love the city, the feeling that I get whenever I've been away from it and I drive over like Coronation Drive, and you can see South Bank on one side and QUT campus on the other, and it's just like, oh, I'm home. So there wasn't really a question of where else I could set it.
It's such an interesting evolution of Brisbane in some ways. I feel like authors like Trent Dalton have done some pretty decent work to elevate Brisbane as being a city really worthy of having stories set in it. And when you think about it, it does make sense. In a lot of ways, it's a city of extremes. Like the weather is quite crazy. It's that sort of subtropical climate, but no doubt bearing the brunt of climate change. But when you think about Brisbane and when you have that feeling of coming home, what are the sort of feelings or the vibes that you think make Brisbane different to, say, a Melbourne or a Sydney? Like how do you sum up Brisbane in your mind?
Yeah, there's even a line in the book where something I describe it as being like when you go to Melbourne, Melbourne has this like cool, almost mean vibe. And then for me, when I think of Sydney, it's like bronze Sydney ciders, like tonic water at breakfast. And I just think of Brisbane as just like untapped potential, like just doing its own thing and like under the radar and almost quite chill comparatively to like the bustling streets of Melbourne or even Sydney. And it's definitely still it's a capital city, like it's still busy, but there's something about like even just going and hanging out in West End, the food and the op shopping and like the bookstores, it's just this cool vibe that is just, I think, more accessible.
I love that phrase, untapped potential, because it totally sums up what it feels like to be in your 20s. And that's a lot of how I would describe Gabby and Gordon, as muddling their way, but holy moly, there is a lot of untapped potential there. Just got to work through their crap, to put it politely. So interestingly, when I was doing a little bit of internet research, I found that you'd made a playlist, and the one I saw, I think you've done a couple, but the one I found was on their HQ website, your publisher's website. And it was 6 songs that capture a sentiment or a vibe for Lovesick. It seems like music is quite important to you. I think you acknowledged a specific Halsey album in your acknowledgements. Do you listen to music when you write? Is it really important for you in terms of setting a mood?
Yes, definitely. It is 100% first and foremost the mood. I've heard a lot of people lately say they don't like the word, but it's definitely like the vibe.
Gets you into that mindset of what it is to be in your 20s. And a lot of those songs that you have listed are songs about breaking up and yearning, and there's a definite young coolness to them, I would say.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, it's also like, as well as almost like the soundtrack to the novel, it's also music that I think the characters would be listening to. I think coming from like a technical writing standpoint or viewpoint, it's almost like you kind of have to know, we don't have to know, but if you can say, oh yeah, Gabby's listening to like an old Bring Me the Horizon album, it just shows how well that you know that character, which just leads into so many other, it's how you develop dialogue and their opinion on something. Like it just is a really great way to sort of understand your character completely. It's another reason why I like say what specific book she's reading, or like, because that's just another way that you know your character.
How much of you do you think is in Gabby?
Gabby has this, she wants to come across as can't be hurt, doesn't care about people's opinions. And I think that was definitely me when I was in my like earlier 20s. I think I definitely wanted to be seen as someone like that, who was just tough and no insecurities, had this really thick armor when there actually isn't much of an armor at all. But having said that, I think there's a lot more of myself in Gordon. Gordon just has all of these insecurities that greatly interfere with his personal relationships. He's just so unsure of himself. And Gabby is too, to an extent. But for Gordon, it really plays like a big role in his everyday life and how he bonds with people. He's just so unsure of who he is in the world. And I think that's definitely, there's a lot more of myself there.
Gordon is a really sensitive soul, which I know it's horrible gender stereotyping, but for a man, it doesn't come across as quite unusual and refreshing, I suppose, where Gabby does try to wear this suit of armor and it is ultimately shown to be a falsity, I suppose. But it's interesting the layers of emotion and depth that you manage to inject into the two of them. I'm interested in your writing on the line level, and also this synergy, I suppose, between music and your writing, because it could be argued that music lyrics are a form of poetry. And I would say that a lot of your writing actually does read also like poetry. Is that how you approach the writing of the book? Is a lot of it about wordplay and experimentation? Do you write poetry, or do these beautifully formed sentences just come organically out of your head?
I wish.
Well, I'm glad you said, if you answered yes to that, I was going to be very sad, because that's sadly not the way my brain works at all. But I am curious, how do you get to that point of such elevated prose? Is it writing and rewriting, or, as I said, is it sort of taking the time to just engage in poetry and wordplay?
There's a little bit, honestly, from every option there. I do think you have to be, as a writer, you have to, if you want to write in a certain way, you do have to read that genre. If you want your prose to be poetic, I think you have to engage a lot in poetry. Like I was reading a lot of poetry when I was writing Lovesick. I feel terrible because the poet's name is, his first name is David. The collection was called Crush. Gorgeous. I read that multiple times while I was writing. There's also a lot of workshopping and experimentation and thinking. I always think about the body as well. If I'm trying to describe an emotion, I think about like the bodily feeling, and I sort of think about what colors align with that like feeling, and I try to go from there. And then some of it does like flow organically. But to get to that point where something can flow organically, I think you have to have done the other work. You have to have engaged with the poetry, and you have to kind of know your characters and know your setting and your conflict, like their motivations and all of that sort of thing. So even though, maybe you get into like a flow state and you can write like a paragraph or a section or whatever, and you're like, oh, okay, that's actually pretty good and doesn't need that much tweaking. But it's just because you've done all the foundational work. So yeah, it's definitely not easy, and there's a lot of steps to it. And the writing style, project to project, it changes, and it depends on your voice as well, the voice of the story. There is one section that I remember writing, and it did come very naturally. And it's at the very beginning when she's sitting in Ben's backyard, and it's just describing the backyard and how she wishes, maybe nature would just reclaim her. And that section, I remember I just wrote it in like 2 minutes, but it was also draft 10 of the novel.
So you really knew your character by that point, knew how she would inhabit the space and experience the nature around her. So I think what you're saying is that what comes across as effortless and beautiful is actually the product of many, many years and thousands of hours of work of both writing and, I suppose, researching in a way in terms of consuming poetry, music, but also experiences, life experiences. Your acknowledgements are so interesting because you have a list of things that you say helped you write the book, and they're really quite an eclectic mix, ranging from cold trips to Melbourne to getting drunk on Prosecco with your mum and dad to watching the Blair Witch Project. What's the role of life experience, and in particular these life experiences that helped you write the book? Are you a journaling kind of writer, or do you put yourself back in those experiences to evoke the sorts of feelings you need to inhabit the characters in the book?
I love that you've asked this question, because when I wrote my acknowledgements, I sort of thought, like, what do I actually want to acknowledge here? And how come I've actually been able to write this book? And like, writing what you know is so true. I think even if you are writing, romantasy or high fantasy, or there's always an element of the things that you've been through and your interpersonal relationships and how you're experiencing politics and religion to be able to write anything like that. And yeah, for me, I don't journal. I've always wanted to. I've never been able to stick with it. So I guess in a way, when I write fiction, it's kind of a way of journaling and how you sort of process things that have happened. And I think a lot of that is subconscious, but there's no way that I could have written a relationship like Roisin and Gabby without have had friends where it just hasn't worked out for whatever reason, but you really loved that person. And there's no way I could have written those characters and had that intensity come across on the page without having experienced any of those feelings. There's Gabby references how they used to work in the restaurant and deal with like the line cooks with the spiderweb tattoos on their elbows, and then they'd go out on their break and have ciggies, but then there'd be cockroaches there and it would just be like messy and grimy. And there's no way you can write that without having experienced the feeling of like your relief from the rush of the restaurant is going out to the grimy bins and debriefing. it's such a unique experience, I think. Well, it
Mm.
might not be so unique, but it feels unique, and you have to live it to a certain extent to get it across on the page authentically, which
Mm.
I hope it's felt authentic.
Yeah, it feels authentic in the sense that there's so many different layers of complexity, I think, that you achieve. And that is what life is like. Sometimes it
Mm.
can be so hard to articulate, but oh my goodness, you have made an awesome fist of it because it feels very real and very true. And I
Thank you.
suppose we have talked a lot in this conversation about the heartache and heartbreak of the book, but ultimately I came away feeling that it was a story of hope, even though Gabby makes some of the most atrocious decisions and made me feel quite upset at her capacity for self-destruction. I think that what the book is saying, that with enough healing and time and with working on yourself and your own baggage, that people can find their way ultimately back to each other. But it's not a guarantee. It doesn't work out for all of the relationships here. And I think Gordon's dad says something quite profound, which is that emotional choices can't always be explained. And maybe sometimes they're not choices at all because they're feelings and we can't always control how we feel. I'm wondering though, what did you want readers to take away? Maybe not even as a theme or a message, but just as a feeling and experience of having read your book.
I wanted people to be able to connect with that sense of hope and that feeling of you don't have to be defined by the things that have been done to
Mm.
you, or even you can heal. Sometimes you like definitely need to heal, and like from the things that you've done to people as well, you can move on and reshape your life and your relationships. And it's also okay sometimes. Sometimes you have to make peace with what you have as well. And the ultimate feeling that I wanted people to have was this sense of hope. I got to a point where I sort of thought, what's the point of this novel? Because it does deal with like a lot of heavy themes. So what is the point that I'm trying to get at? Because what I really didn't want was to people to come to the end and think, well, that was just really upsetting and lousy, because I think even good writing can't make up for that feeling of dissatisfaction. So I really wanted this feeling of hopefulness, and like, there is I mean, it might sound cliche to say that loud, but like there is always tomorrow, and this night will end, and you can have a shower and wash your face and wash your hair and just deal with this when you're feeling like a little more alive the next morning. And it feels impossible, but it's possible.
It's definitely the way that I felt coming away from that, even though your 20s are incredibly messy. In some ways, we all have to go through it to get to
Mm.
that other side, whatever the other side is. I'm wondering, what do you think now might be next for you? You're having this incredible experience of new motherhood, and you've spoken about how personal experience gets channeled into your work. Is that something you might look to next? What are you working on?
Well, at the moment, HQ have my draft for book two, which is a novel that's really about like longing and grief and yearning, and how like all of these things kind of get in the way of desires, or how they even shape our desire. But I do really want to write something. Like I said, I often fall back into there's always themes of motherhood and the parent-child relationship, but I do want to write something that's quite the main focus. I don't have a lot of spare time at the moment.
No, sorry, I should have framed that question very differently. When you have a 6-month-old, there's really not a lot of deep writing time. But if your experience is anything like mine, I found new motherhood was a whole new wellspring of inspiration and
Yeah,
creativity. And while I didn't have time at the time I had a 6-month-old to write, those intense feelings stayed with me for some years and sustained me into writing a lot of new material.
I can understand why, because the depth of feeling just changes. Like it just grows to this level of didn't know that you could feel things so deeply, didn't know that I could run on 4 hours of broken sleep. I didn't realize that a tiny little gummy smile could actually
Mm.
change the entire day and like turn everything around. The smell of a baby's head. I said it before, but it is unreal in the truest sense of the word, which is it's really difficult to articulate which I find particularly interesting because people have been having babies for a very long time. So it's really interesting to me how you can change as a person in these ways, but still be yourself, still try to hold on to yourself. I'm also really interested in writing about the mother, like you as the mother, and how you kind of step into that role and how the mother is a little bit different. But I think that I still am very much a new mum and I've got some reflecting to do before I can attempt
Totally.
that too
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they do say right from the scar, not the wound. So it
Yeah.
might take a little bit of processing, but fair to say that someone, I think, once said to me that having a child is the best and the worst thing that you ever do. And I think that's somewhat true. And the job for the writer of trying to articulate that to the page is quite the challenge, and one that a lot of us are always chasing. But just coming now to the end of our conversation, at the start of it, I said how much I appreciated that you dedicated this novel to the 12-year-old you. Now that you've got the novel out there, I'm
Mm.
wondering if the reality has matched the dream, or if there's anything that has surprised, delighted, or totally made you despair about publishing.
Well, on my doubtful days, there's definitely like a bit of, oh, now people can just perceive me.
They've reached
um,
inside your brain and seen
yeah.
everything.
But I've been really surprised by the support from people who I've never met before. The messages that I've received on Instagram of people reaching out and saying, like, thank you so much for writing this. I've had a few messages that, I'm going through a breakup and this has just made me feel so seen, or I've been through something like this and it just makes me remember and feel understood. And that has felt really touching to me. And it's definitely cleared up any feelings of, well, what are people even going to think when they get to the end of this book? I don't Google anything, I don't go on Goodreads. But even just the knowledge that there's a handful of people out there that have felt really deeply connected has both surprised me, but also has made it so worth it and makes up for any critique or any negative review that I think I could get personally anyway. And also the support from booksellers has been
Mm.
awesome. Yeah, it's just been so amazing. Everyone that I've spoken to, Mary Ryan's and New Farm and going into Harry Harthog, avid reader, even going into like a QBD or a Dimmix. Everyone is so excited to have you there and it's just really awesome. So it's been a fantastic ride so far.
Yeah, the book community in Australia is pretty special, and I think as authors we accept that our books aren't necessarily for everyone, but gosh,
Mhm.
if they're for one person, then that is quite an amazing feeling. And your book, Lovesick, was definitely one for me. Even though I'm a woman
Oh,
in my 50s, I still deeply connected to everything that Gabby and Gordon were going through, and I just sat back and really enjoyed the lyricism and the specific writing that you achieved on the page. So congratulations, Lillian. And needless to say, I will definitely be reading your next one.
well, thank you so much, Cassie. Thank you. It's been great to be here.
That's it for this episode, folks. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If so, I'd love it if you'd leave a review on your preferred listening platform, which may include Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Until next time, friends, happy reading!